Dr. Danielle Tashiro Mamers, you did three postdocs. Why did you do three postdocs?
I did three postdocs because I thought each postdoc would be the last step before getting into a tenure track position.
Mm,
And um, each of those postdocs, when I finished my PhD, I had like one postdoc offer. So there was one thing set in front of me to do. And then as that was winding up, I had one more postdoc offer. And so it just felt like following the steps that I ought to follow. Um, to pursue at the time, I just really, really wanted to be a professor. That was what I was
mm,
really focused on. And I felt like as a postdoc, I was moving forward towards that goal. I was able to do a lot of writing and publishing during that time because I had a very low teaching load, but had some teaching experience. So it felt like, okay, these are roles that are helping me put together the portfolio that one day some selection committee will see and say, oh my gosh, we need to have her. And that just didn't happen.
yeah. So at what point in doing that, you're trying to become a professor, you're doing everything that it takes to become a professor, which meant that
Mhm.
you went to postdoc after postdoc. At what point did you realize I don't know if I want this either. I don't know if I want this anymore, or this is taking longer than I expected.
I think it was I don't know if I want this anymore, more than it taking longer. There was a real, not one moment, but a real turning point was when I had about 6 months left in my final postdoc. And
Mhm.
I was at a 4 day, this was during COVID. So it was a 4 day online, um, writing workshop for, um, early career researchers and actually there was tenured faculty in it as well, but it was for humanities researchers who wanted to write for a broader public. So writing short essays, writing memoir, researched memoir kind of stuff, creative nonfiction, like wanting to write in genres that are outside of the peer reviewed essay or monograph.
Mhm.
And in this group of 40 students, I would say probably half of them were faculty members and 100% of them were miserable in some way and kind of let that slip. Like they were there because they want to be doing a different kind of work. So there's some desire for change, but a lot of over the course of those 4 days, I heard a lot of stories about people living in far away from their partners, working in really toxic environments. And I just kind of I don't know. There was something about that moment that I think I really felt for the first time that, like, oh, happiness is not just on the other side of that line between postdoc and faculty member, that suddenly it's not going to all be perfect. And I was not keen. I was really into the research I was doing, and I was like medium on teaching. And so I was not super keen on taking a teaching intensive contract. And so through that spring and early summer, I was really thinking about like, okay, what can I actually do? I was offered a fourth postdoc, and the project would basically be ghostwriting articles for a law professor, which is a discipline that I do not work in. Um, and the pay would have been almost as much as I made as a grad student. So the very little progress I made in pay as a postdoc, it would have been like a real backslide. And I just felt like I can't do this. I need to find something else.
It's similar to me because in my decision to sort of move away from academia to it wasn't just one event, it was a series of events, and one of them was seeing a an assistant professor job that was offering to pay me less than my the postdoc that I had been laid off from. And I don't know, at that
Mhm.
point I just lost it. And so I totally identify with that feeling. So then you decided to move into what? What did you decide to do And how did you get there?
So I realized, so the whole way along, I had taken a bit of a break between my master's degree and my PhD. And all through my PhD, I felt very confident telling people, well, if I don't get a faculty job, I'll just get a different job because I'm not going to like teach like 8 courses a year as an adjunct at 3 different universities or whatever.
Yeah.
And so then that spring, when the realization was hitting, like, I need to find something else, I was like, okay, well, now it's time. I've been saying for 10 years that when it comes to the end of the line, I'll get a different job. And I realized that I don't know what other jobs are, other than like the vague sense of like, oh, maybe I could work for the government. I had no clear sense at all. And it was yeah, it was a real like, also realization of like the combination of like the hyper focus on pursuing doing what I needed felt like I needed to do to be competitive for a faculty position. At no point did I really like look to the left or right of me to see what other people are doing. Most of my friends are either academics or um, public school teachers or nurses. And I knew I don't want to be a nurse or a public school teacher. So what else can I do? And so I had to basically start a little research project to figure out like what are jobs. And I started that like dutifully following. I'm like a firstborn daughter, so I love following rules.
Yes,
Um,
me too. Me too.
yeah. And so I reached out to my very first postdoc was at an humanities initiative institute here at the University of Toronto,
Okay.
and the associate director of that initiative had a PhD, and I had had a really warm relationship with her. And so when I realized, like, okay, I need to figure something else out, I thought, who do I know that has a PhD that isn't a prof? And I remembered Kim. And so I called her up, and she very generously took me out for coffee, told me about the decisions that she had made, but also gave me a list of 3 or 4 other people at the university that I might reach out to just to learn about the kind of job they were doing.
Yeah.
Um, I also did a lot of, I guess we could call it like literature review. I read a
Yeah.
lot of job postings to try and figure out like what jobs are even available on the staff side of a university.
Yeah.
And realized quite quickly that like I don't know what most of those things mean. Like what is someone who is doing industry partnership development versus a
Yeah.
grants officer? And so I just like started reading these and tried to get a sense of like, okay, is this something I maybe could do? And then I would try and find someone who was doing that kind of work and so I did just a ton of informational interviews,
Yeah.
and I got very lucky because I was not on the job market for that long. Once I put together my materials and had a set, I applied for, I think, probably 3 or 4 different types of jobs, like a couple of like basically like grant writing jobs, awards officer, these various kinds of staff folks who are helping make research happen at the university.
Yeah.
And then an opportunity came up for a new research initiative that was called the Critical Digital Humanities Initiative. And I am not a digital humanities person, but the managing director role was really around building a team, um, creating network connections, organizing events, things like that, which I felt like, okay, I have like a tiny bit of experience in most
Yeah.
of these things.
Yeah.
It was definitely a more senior title than I had like assigned to myself in my job search. And so that kind of freaked me out a little bit. But I had a couple of like really good supportive people who were like, no, you should put your name in there. You could also apply.
Yeah.
And I was really, really fortunate to get an interview. But I do believe that part of the reason I got that interview was doing that networking among meeting other folks with PhDs who are in staff roles and building a few. It was not really long term relationships. Like this was over the course of the summer, but I think that helped. Um,
Yeah, this is
yeah.
so, so helpful. And the reason it's helpful is because a lot of the time when I bring up networking or like
Hmm.
just talk to people, find out what they're doing, people are a little apprehensive or they're a little hesitant
Hmm.
to take those steps, because I think one person was telling me the other day that all throughout her life and her career, she had been told that in order to be a brilliant scientist or a brilliant academic, you needed to look inward. You needed to depend on your own brilliance, right? And
Mm,
that it's almost like seeking for help or asking for help was a sign of weakness, right? And
mhm,
my, and so she was, of course, she was unlearning that, and she was sharing that with me. And I was just wondering where first of all, I was wondering where that came from, but I also realized that it's a subtle message within academic circles. And if you're not careful, you can internalize that and make that extreme to the point where when you need a job, you also apply this paradigm to that, and then it's very prohibitive. It really can limit your opportunities. So I want to
mhm,
lean into the networking piece a little bit.
mhm.
Most of these were people you knew, or were there people that people referred you to them? How did you find these people to network with?
So the first two people that I spoke with were people that I had met in my postdoc.
Yeah.
Um, but from there, and I will say, like, for your listeners or your audience who are apprehensive about networking, I
Hmm.
truly believe that this is a skill you can learn.
Yeah.
I was not good at networking during my academic
Hmm.
career. And in hindsight, that probably was a bit of a barrier.
Yeah.
But I just did not feel confident enough in why people should pay attention to me. Because that's what networking felt like. Here's what I do. Here's my little project. Pay attention to me.
Right.
Whereas with this kind of like informational interview research summer, I had a really clear question. And the question was like, what is your job? What kinds of things are you doing? What does a week in your life, average working life, look like?
Yeah.
And I think that um, I have also been on the receiving. I will talk to anybody who emails me and asks me to have coffee because these are kinds of this is really different than like a meeting. First of all, I'm not asking you to hire me or give me a job. I'm just asking you to help me gauge some more, get some more insight
Yeah.
on what kinds of life paths are career paths are available. And I think most people, like, we spend so much time with our heads down in our jobs.
Hmm.
Um, and the only way we really talk about, sometimes it feels like the only way people talk about their jobs is like to complain about them to their like spouse after work, or with their friends. And so having someone ask you about like the kind of bigger picture or the mechanics of what you're doing sort of day in and day out, what the challenges are. Um, that can, in my experience, like being on the receiving end of those requests, is actually kind of a nice point of reflection of like, oh yeah, these are the skills that I think somebody who wants to do this work might need. And so I don't know. I think if you're hesitant to do informational interviews, like this is just from my perspective, but I really think that it's not that much of an ask. Like,
Yeah.
I don't have to prepare to go into an informational interview. If
Yeah.
I'm doing the interviewing, then I definitely prepare, but it doesn't ask a lot of me to show up. And I just, but to step back to your original question. So I started with two people that I knew,
Yeah.
and then in each of those conversations, they referred me to like, oh, you might be interested in talking to this person about business development roles. You might be interested in talking to this person about awards officer roles.
Right.
Um, I also had a friend of mine from my PhD cohort she did like a 1 year postdoc and then went into like data ethics work in the health world. And so I talked to her. She was a great guide for me, somebody who was like a few steps ahead of where I was. And she gave me a lot of just really helpful advice, connected me with some people, but also like, I don't know, there's like real genuine comfort in knowing that someone else has gone down this path and it's turned out well for them. Like she is so much when we were talking, it was so clear that she was so much happier in the work that she was doing in the health ethics role rather than the work that she was doing when we were PhD students together. And so that was really, it was really important for me to see
Yeah.
that.
Well, it's like a positive reinforcement that okay, maybe I'm going the right way, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so that's very, very helpful, Danielle. So, like you said, I just want to summarize what you just said, which is start with people you know, right? A lot
Hmm.
of the time we bypass or we forget about our own circles. And I was joking the other day, and I'm like, it could even be the neighbor down the street, and you know that they do something, and you want to get into that field, and maybe you say
Hmm.
good morning to them every day. They could even be the person that you network with. So there's just so many people, even within our in like our current circles, that can be valuable sources of information. I also enjoy the fact that you said that you read job descriptions to learn to learn even terms, right? I think this is a really important part of it. How did you use that process in in in,
Mm.
in this transition?
Well, reading the job descriptions helped me identify people to talk to. Because then when I saw a job description, I was like, okay, maybe this. Then I looked for somebody with that role currently and asked them to tell me about their job. Because the job descriptions I find are so abstract.
Yes.
Now with like four years in hindsight, like I have 4 years of experience working in the university administration ecosystem, specifically at one university, because also every university uses different language to describe a project manager, um, for example. But it helped me identify a couple of things. One was possible titles that I was interested in, and importantly, positions that I was not in. That it was like, okay, this is a definite not for me.
Yeah.
And it also helped me. Um, it's a real balance, I think, of trying to look at the job ad almost as like a measurement device. So it's like, where are my skills on here already? Like, where am I matching up and where am I not matching up? And I think when you're deciding to leave academia, that is can be an incredibly vulnerable time where there's a lot of, you can be really hard on yourself around feelings of failure, around feelings of inadequacy, abandonment, like all kinds of things. And so I think job descriptions can be really tricky because sometimes when we read those, our first reaction is like, oh no, that's not me. I haven't done any of
I
that.
haven't done any of that. Yes.
Yeah. But like for my job, like I've never been a managing director before, but then I looked at it. So my first response was like, I haven't done that. That can't be me.
Yeah.
And then when I spent more time with the job description and it was like, okay, managing a $3 million budget. I'm like, well, I certainly haven't done that, but I have managed a $3,000 budget with a
Yeah.
small research grant that I
Yeah.
had. And I know that the financial policies of the university are the same for a $3 million grant and a $3,000 grant. And then there was like hiring and mentoring a team. Well, I haven't hired and mentored a whole team before, but I did through my $3,000 grant hire and mentor an undergraduate research assistant. And so there were ways that I kind of parsed the job description and really tried to like hype myself up a little bit. And it's like, okay, like I have done all of these things in like a much smaller scale.
Yeah.
Um, and so that was really helpful. There were other times, sometimes I saw, like I looked at some project management ones and became really clear to me to be competitive. I would need the PMP project management designation. And I spoke with a few people who are working in that area, and they also affirmed that like to be a competitive candidate, you really do need that. And at that point in my life, I was not willing to do more formal training to get a
Yes.
job.
Yeah.
Um,
I totally get it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
And that brings us to a really important point, which is sometimes you don't, most of the time, you don't need extra education to get to the next step. Yeah, maybe, you can consider it, but it's not a must. Certain roles
Hmm.
definitely legally required that you have certain certifications, but I find that with just the PhD or master's degree alone, you it can take you to so many places. But I especially like what you said, Danielle, that at first glance, I've had this complaint too. At first glance at these job descriptions, it can feel like, well, I'm not qualified for any of this. And the reality is that no, you probably are. It's just that you are, the language is different. And this is where
Hmm.
learning the language and why reading job descriptions becomes important, because sometimes through that you get to learn the language and then you get to think about, okay, but how do my skills translate to this particular role? And so they just assume that, oh, because it doesn't say you have to have this type of research, or you have to have done this, then I don't qualify. And
Hmm.
I hope that if you're listening to this episode, what Danielle is saying really is helpful for you. And actually, to plug in something I recently created, I created the PhD Skills Translator. You can go to PhDskillstranslator.com and you can put your academic experience in there and just see how it helps you brainstorm and craft your experiences for non-academic roles, right? That's really why I created
Hmm.
that tool, because a lot of academics and PhDs fall into this trap of saying, oh my goodness, I'm reading all these job descriptions and I qualify for nothing. And that that's not true. Clearly, there are several
Hmm.
PhDs who are working in these roles, in different types of roles, and you can get there too. So thank you, Danielle, for
Hmm.
sharing that. And so you worked in university administration for a while. What were you doing? What was your title and what were you doing?
So for the past 4 years, I've been in just one role. I've been the managing director of the Critical Digital Humanities Initiative. And that is, it was a special institutional strategic initiative at the University of Toronto where we had for the humanities, some pretty substantial funding to build a network of scholars who are using digital tools and methods to ask questions, critical questions about like society, politics, history, this kind of, I think just like really amazing socially committed research that often is marginalized within a large institution like the University of Toronto. But we built basically like a mini pop-up institute. We had I'm saying in past tense because we are winding down the initiative now. But we had postdoctoral fellows working with us who were amazing. I learned so much from them. We had a cohort of graduate fellows each year. We provided seed funding for new projects. We built a UX design accelerator where we co designed and developed, I think, 21 digital projects to help share this amazing research that's happening within the university with wider audiences. So, um, part of what has been most interesting to me is that kind of knowledge mobilization. Like, how do we communicate research in compelling and engaging ways that are beyond the peer-reviewed article? Um, and alongside that, at one point our exec team was 11 people. So suddenly I went from sitting in this home office writing a book by myself to hiring, mentoring, managing a team, which was just very wild uh, change in direction for me. Um, I oversaw a mind-boggling metrics and financial reporting process every year. Yeah, there was a lot on
There
the
was a
go.
lot. It sounds like you did a lot.
Yeah.
You managed research, which is definitely something you do in academia. You
Mhm.
talk about writing a book,
So
right?
I finished my book manuscript the same week that I started this job.
Wow.
So the book based on my dissertation was published while I
Yes.
was in this role, but the bulk of the research and writing was done before I started
Okay.
my administration role.
Got it. Got it. You got to manage a lot of people, sounds like. Uh,
Hmm.
you got to disseminate research in a way that's a little different from the traditional peer reviewed process.
Hmm.
and you got to gather to, I mean, you did a whole lot, right? And that's the thing, is that all of these things are things that you would do in an academic role anyway, but usually
Hmm.
they're downplayed because they tend to play second fiddle to your research, right? And
Hmm.
so that's another point. I want to just highlight that a lot of the skills that you end up using in these non-academic jobs end up being the very skills that we kind of like, we thought they were mundane, we thought they were just to
Hmm.
help the process, and yet it's a very valuable skill set and tool set to have. You know, it's interesting because you worked in a non-academic role within an academic institution. And I like to highlight
Hmm.
that too, because there's several of these roles within academic institutions. Do you want to say anything to that?
Well, something that was some really helpful advice for me, both when I think I got this advice shortly after I started my job. And then because it was originally a 3-year contract, I was like, okay, this is slightly longer than a postdoc, but doesn't feel super secure. So I got to start thinking about what's next.
Right.
And so I was chatting with some people, and like my main question was like, how do I find out what the other jobs are out there? So the same sort of question that I had been asking in my informational interviews. And a senior staff person told me that like and our university is right in the center of the city, so it does feel like a little city. But you have to think about like the university as a city, and as a student or as a researcher, you maybe are familiar with like 2 or 3 blocks of that city. Like when I was a postdoc, I went to the building with my office, the library, the gym, that was kind of it. And he suggested that like you just have to really go like take your time and get to know the other neighborhoods in the city. And so learning about like, okay, this is what like grant support and grant administration, what these folks are up to. This is what the advancement and fundraising folks are up to. Also each of these kinds of areas within university like staff teams have their own culture and own kind of way of doing things, which is often, in my experience at least, quite different from the academic culture of the exact same institution, for better or for worse. And so part of it is figuring out like, okay, where are the good people that I want to work with?
Right, right,
Um,
right.
yeah.
So for somebody who maybe they're thinking in 2025, they are just wrapping up their PhD and they're like, I don't want to do 3 postdocs. I don't even want to do 1 postdoc, but I do want to still work within academia, but in some of these other
Hmm.
staff roles. What should they start doing?
I think, well, one thing would be to use it to use a tool like yours where you're starting to analyze what your experience is, what experiences you've had, and how you can think about those in a different context. So, how
Right.
can you do that translation work of moving from like, okay, I did a bunch of archival research, or I spent 6 years in a chemistry lab. Um, Thinking about another bit of advice that I heard, I think from Jen Polk, but it could have been another smart woman on on LinkedIn, but it's just in academia, we are so trained to think of our work in really big buckets. There's teaching bucket, research and publishing bucket, and service bucket, and to really kind of break those down. So like when you're teaching, what are the actual components that are going into course delivery? There's
Yeah.
facilitation, there's if you have like slides and things like that, you're thinking about communications. And so I found like going through, breaking down, thinking about like, okay, what are the actual tasks and what are the skills that help me do those tasks well
Yeah.
is one helpful step. And then another, I think, more important step is to really be honest with yourself. Which of these things do you enjoy the actual act of, which is different than enjoying the idea of? So
Right.
I enjoy the idea of being a teacher at the front of the classroom, but when I'm really honest with myself, there
Yeah.
were more parts of running and managing a classroom in contemporary higher ed that I did not enjoy. And so I think a big part of the way that academia, like in my experience, kind of warps your brain,
Yeah.
um, is by just like I personal identity and job title are so tightly fused. And so
Yes.
I think doing these exercises of trying to think about like, okay, what am I actually doing? Like, what are the verbs involved rather than the nouns? What's the process of writing like rather than the book? And what parts of those things do I really enjoy and want to spend more time in? What's making me feel fulfilled? What's making me feel drained? And doing that kind of like self reflection, I think can set you up to go into that job search from a position of like internal strength. Like, even if you feel like your work experience outside of the PhD is limited, if you have a clear sense of like, these are the work I want to do. Like these are the verbs that I want to be using when I describe my day. You are like, if you can get that down, you're way ahead of a lot of people, whether they're coming from academia or not. Like so many of us just kind of stumble into doing a job that leads to another job. And if there's not a clear transition, like making the decision to leave or stay in academia, we often don't have that point of self reflection. And yeah, so those are some thoughts.
Those are some thoughts. Yeah, no, they're really good thoughts. And also, I like that you said focus on the verbs and not the nouns, which means, and the way that I've thought about this is don't just focus on the titles, focus on the impact, right? What are
Hmm.
you doing every day? Titles can be made up. Like you were saying earlier
Hmm.
on, like the name for a project manager can differ across institutions, but
Hmm.
ultimately you have to think about, okay, but what impact am I making? What am I going to be doing every day more
Hmm.
than the title, right? And I think that that's what you mean by that, right?
Yeah, and I do think like if I'm to be completely honest, um, I was like pretty chuffed to get a job with a fancy title coming out of after my like being like, oh, I have now I'm a managing director of a research
Yes.
initiative. Like that at a moment where my ego was feeling pretty fragile,
That's
that
important to
I'm
you.
I have to admit that that felt really good.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Because partly the pursuit of I want to be a professor, it's that tie of self-worth and identity and self-knowledge with job title. And so at that moment in like September 2021, when I was first making this change, it made have the title made it feel easier to be like, I'm not just walking away, I'm walking into a cool position at a cool growing initiative. And now, 4 years later, I feel differently about it. It's like, no, now I don't need that. I've done enough of the self reflection and rode the real grief roller coaster. Um, and now I'm much more into like, okay, which job is going to give me the flexibility to have a life? Which job is going to use 80% of my energy and brain power? So I have 20% left for me and like the creative projects that are what I really want to be doing 100% of the time.
Yeah. And we're going to
Yeah.
talk
Which
about we're going to talk about your
yeah,
creative projects, but I thank you for being honest that also the title
yeah,
was like I wanted to have that title. I
yeah.
think that's important. And you know, I think that the earlier statement is not to downplay that the fact that the title may really be doing a real thing for you, which is great.
Hmm.
I think what ends up you know, stopping people in their tracks or making people freeze up is, oh my goodness, like this is the title. And they get sometimes some people, instead of, in your case, you flipped it around, you allowed it to like boost your ego. But for some people, the thought of a managing director is like even
Hmm.
intimidating for them, right? And so it's like,
Hmm.
oh, I can't do that. I've never managed, I've never directed anything. And so
Hmm.
when you're focusing on that, right, and allowing that to like, you know, to delay things and just cause analysis paralysis, think
Oh
about
yeah.
the impact. Or like Danielle, flip it around and say, hey, I get to be this like thing that boosts my ego.
Hmm.
That's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to also talk about your creative projects. You've done some art I've seen on LinkedIn, and
Hmm.
let's talk a little bit about that.
Oh, yeah. So in addition to my research administration work, I've probably in the last 2 years, 2.5 years, um, taught myself how to draw and started a kind of by accident. a freelance illustration company. So I do live illustration. So it's kind of like sometimes called graphic recording, where I will draw a conversation while a keynote is happening. Or last night I was illustrating a panel as a way of kind of creating a one-page visual summary of a conversation.
I've seen
Um,
those. I've been to events where
yeah,
there's been a freelance, well, I don't know
yeah,
if it's freelance, but there's been an artist drawing.
yeah.
What led to that? What made you want to teach yourself how to draw?
So to be honest, because my managing director job was killing my attention, it was really breaking my brain.
Oh,
Um, so when I started in September 2021, in Canada, we still had quite a lot of COVID lockdown measures. So the university was still operating virtually.
right.
And so I was hired into a virtual position with a virtual team, which our university has three campuses and we serve all of them. So the virtual model has actually worked really well for us to be
Yeah.
able to serve a broader community. But we were having these events that I had planned with speakers coming in who I had invited. And then we got the Zoom set up. I've given the introduction. Everything's chugging along. And then somehow, 15, 20 minutes in, I'm looking over at my other monitor and just checking my email real quick. And suddenly it's like half an hour has passed. I have not really listened to the presentation. And, and I just found that I went from like being able to like sit and read and write for hours at a time to suddenly my attention span is like 5 minutes, 10 minutes. And partly that's because, like, in my role, I have a lot of responsibilities. And so I get a lot of email. Um, when I was a postdoc, I was inbox zero all the time because no one was emailing me. It was really easy to be in control of my inbox.
Yeah.
Um, and so part of that is like my own like just real challenge in learning boundaries and learning like, oh, it's okay, like putting that good girl part of me to rest a little bit, um and knowing that like this doesn't need to be answered 5 minutes after receiving it. But I was like kind of, I just really wanted to reclaim some of that attention span. And I had seen graphic recording or sketchnoting, and there was just something about it that I felt really attracted to. And so I, like a good little student, ordered a book, read a book about it, and then waited about 6 months until I finally gave it a try. And it's just like totally, it's like vortex. Like you can, if you are listening to what someone is saying, synthesizing to pull out the key points, and then trying to capture that in simple illustrations and just a couple of words, like that takes 100% of your brain power. And it's impossible to think about email while you're doing that. And so it just became one of those things where I was just kind of doing it for sending it to our team afterwards. Sometimes I would make these like visual notes of different meetings that I was going to. And I then eventually I started feeling brave enough to share them on LinkedIn, um, and it kind of just snowballed from there. People started asking me to draw things for them, and I started saying yes. And now I do, I would say probably half of my freelance work is live illustration, and then the other half is a mix of creating mostly like research, illustrated research communication. So creating infographics, sometimes creating a comic that captures the core points of a particular research project. Um, yeah, it's been amazing and has really, I think, rewired my brain for the better.
Yeah.
Um, but also like learning to draw. I was taking a still life alongside this kind of drawing for work stuff. I started taking a still life class at a time where I was feeling like honestly not awesome about like I have this administration job, but and it's good, but it's I don't know where this is going. And I was just I don't know. Um I was feeling yeah, there was just like something that I was yearning for, and I stumbled into a class that I saw advertised on Instagram, and it looked like a bunch of cool ladies having a nice time painting flowers together. And I thought, I want to be one of those cool ladies.
Did you have any artistic skills before you started? Can
Mm,
anybody get started with this? Because people, when I see people doing these live sketches, I am just amazed at their skill to be able to listen and then draw and then communicate what was said and capture and summarize what was said in
mhm.
this piece of art. And for those of you that may not know what this is, maybe I'll ask Danielle if she could share something so that in the editing phase of this we put it up on the screen for those that may watch this on video. If you're listening on audio, sorry, but if you're
Mhm.
watching this on video, maybe we'll put up one of those pieces of art. But did you have these artistic skills and then you just honed them?
Yeah. So I think like I would say I didn't really do, I think I definitely had a kind of impulse to create and to make stuff. Um, during COVID, I got back into making zines, which is something that I did a lot in my early 20s.
Yeah.
Um, but my drawing skills were definitely extremely rudimentary.
Right.
Um, but I had a lot of like I make zines to like send to my friends and family. And your friends and family are generally, hopefully, like a good hype squad. So
Mhm.
I would like make something that had a little more drawing than the one before, and people would be like, "Wow, that was so cool! Thanks for sending me that." And that kind of, that positive feedback like makes you want to do it a little bit more.
Yeah.
I would say there's a very wide range of styles when it comes to graphic recording and live illustration. Um, Mine have very simple, like hand drawing style. There's some folks who do this who their background is they have a Bachelor of Fine Arts. They're true artists and illustrators. Some of them come out of like comics illustration and they are putting together like really complex images. For me, I feel like my way into this is I spent 15 years in academic lecture halls, either receiving information or sharing information
Right.
on either side of the classroom. And that helps me when I'm at a talk to be able to like catch the ideas quickly. Like, 'cause I just have a lot of training in listening. But when I was like all the way through from my undergrad to my PhD, when I was in lectures, I would be like a little court reporter, like sweating, trying to transcribe every single thing that was said. Um, and so part of this, like now um, when I look at things that I did like live illustrations that I did even like a year ago, there's so much text because I still feel like, oh, I have to catch it all. And so that's something I'm working on. It's like less is more.
Less is
Stick to
more.
the high level. Yeah.
Well, that's
Um,
such a valuable skill you've built, and I wish you all the best in building that business. I think what
Thank you.
recently, well, not recently, but about a year ago, I made a video about portfolio careers, and
Mm,
if you're multi-passionate, how you can actually have multiple careers that pull on your skills. And it sounds like that's exactly what
hmm
you do. You have this day job that is in research administration, and now you have this career in live illustration and graphic sketching, and that's also working out. And so for I always say that you don't have to. I mean, sometimes you may have to put some dreams on hold, and then
hmm
pursue them later. But you can definitely build a career that fits your life and
Yeah.
what you want to do.
And I think like really being open to being surprised, which I
Mm.
feel like I am more open to being surprised now than I was 4 or 5 years ago when I was
What
on
do you
the
mean?
academic track.
Yeah. What do you mean
So
when you say
I
being open to be surprised?
I think being open to like now before when you're kind of single tracking on like I'm going to be a professor and the things that I'm doing are leading to that, there's not really a lot of there's only room for bad surprises there where it's like, "Oh, surprise, you're not getting the job. Figure it out." But I
Right.
think like right now the hardest question for me to answer, I've just gone through a round of job interviews this spring. And the hardest question for me to answer is when they ask some version of like, where do you see yourself in 5 years? And usually I play it off and I'm like, well, 5 years ago, I thought I was going to be a professor and now I'm not. So who knows? Um,
But I think that's a brilliant answer, though. I know that
yeah,
a lot of like career coaches say to give a definite answer, and definitely there's
yeah.
place for that. But is that that's the answer you give, right? Like five
That's
years
the
ago.
answer I give, and then I wait for them to laugh, and then I say the things that I like the most about my current job is managing and mentoring a team and doing facilitation. And so wherever I end up, I hope that it will have those two elements.
That's great.
Um, and so it's kind of like it's not just completely being flippant, but I do really feel it's like, well, the thing that kind of I've been trying to just look to as a guide is like I'm already not doing the thing that I trained for 10 years to do. And so I might as well do the things that make me feel happy. Um, and being open to, I guess so being open to being surprised to me looks like trying things out, even if you're not sure where they're going to lead.
Mm,
Um, like when I was really hustling to publish and get grants, it was partly because I had a research question that I wanted to find the answer to. But another part of it was this is what each of these publications hopefully is inching me along towards this
mm,
singular goal. And now when it's like, oh, Danielle, do you want to join this working group? This working group, it's less in being less instrumental, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like being in the working group is probably not going to like definitely move me in one direction or another, but I might meet a handful of new people at this institution that's quite large that is going to open up new conversations and build my network in that way. Going to a workshop might um, introduce you to new things and just I think like being open to trying new things and trying things that aren't where you're not working to be the expert, which I think is something that academia also really trains us into. Um, yeah, but I don't know. It feels, I think, even 2 years ago, I felt pretty freaked out about not having a like career goal that I
mm.
hadn't exchanged. Like, okay, I'm not going to be a professor anymore, so I'm working towards this thing. Like, I'm
Right.
a real goal oriented person most of the time.
Mhm.
And now, and I think it's partly with the surprise of this like creative work that I have no formal training in, um, has really helped me soften the grip on wanting to have a end goal that I'm chasing.
Yeah. That is so good. That is so good, and it's definitely not. It's definitely not the more common paradigm
Hmm.
we're trained on, right? You're trained to have goals, set your smart goals, and there's definitely a place for that, and I respect that. But I agree with you, Danielle,
Hmm.
that it's okay to be open to surprising yourself. And I myself, like, I never in my wildest dreams, like if you asked me when I was 18, 19, 20, going into college, like, would
Hmm.
do you want to be a speaker and a podcast host and a writer and like do you like what is that? That is
Hmm.
never what I would have imagined myself doing, and yet today I find that taking quite a respectable amount of my time in addition to my day job. So it's amazing what happens when you're open to surprising yourself. So
Hmm.
thank you for that bit of
Hmm.
advice. If people want to find you, where can they go?
They can find me on LinkedIn. My last name is very long, so it's just Danielle TM. And if you're interested in seeing this kind of creative side of my work, my website is dtmstudio.ca.
DTMstudio.ca. I'll make sure to put those links in the show notes. Thank you so much, Danielle. This was a great conversation.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.